just give you a little bit of why I want to do this series to get you so you're understanding where I'm coming from. 15 years ago, when I started working in the addictions industry, I was asked by my boss to prepare a brand new workshop for the treatment center I was in on the subject of shame. And I didn't have a clue what it was, so I read the books that were available on shame, and I put together a workshop. The first time I taught it, I saw the impact it had on people coming out of addiction and trauma. And I thought, wow, this is a big topic. But I also saw that it was a super heavy topic. By the end of the workshop, people were having all kinds of memories stirred up by the stuff we were talking about. They were feeling pain at a deeper level than they had felt for a long time. And for a lot of people, it just became too much. It was overwhelming for them. The second thing I noticed is that some of the people before the workshop started said, I don't have any shame. And I started asking clients at the beginning of the workshops from that time on, how much shame do you have? And most would say, I don't have any shame. And by the end of the workshop, they were saying, I got all kinds of shame. And what I realized, it was a topic that people didn't understand and were very unaware of any of it in themselves. But it was once they became aware of it, they began to see how it affected every area of their life. And they began to realize that this was going to be one of the most important areas for them to deal with if they were going to make it in recovery. So that's part of why I want to do this series. Because what I have seen since React started, and 3 years ago yesterday, React began, and what I have seen is the week that we do on shame, for many people, is one of the toughest weeks, but one of the most important weeks of their time at React. So it is a poorly understood issue, but it is a super important issue. And nobody from complex trauma is free of shame. Everybody from complex trauma has some shame. So we're going to start the series, but I want to put this out up front. This may stir up some very painful stuff. If it does, you have my permission to tune me out for a while so you don't get overwhelmed. I can't do all of the material in one night. I can't give you all the tools for healing in this first night. But those tools will come in ensuing nights that we are spending on this topic. So if you are feeling overwhelmed, feel free to just tune out for a little while. Now, what I want you to understand is shame, by definition, is not an emotion. It is a core belief about yourself, about who you think you are. There will be emotions that go with that we call shame emotions, but at its core, by definition, shame is a core belief about myself. Who am I? That is the question. And so what shame means is I have a negative view of myself. I see myself as not having a lot of value, not being very lovable. Therefore, I see myself as not being good enough, and therefore less than others around me. I would say 100% of people with complex trauma have some shame. The greater the complex trauma, the greater the shame, but everybody with complex trauma has some shame. In other words, complex trauma affects your core belief about your identity, and it makes it a negative thing. So I want to develop that tonight and just kind of give you some groundwork to help you understand this concept so that you can begin to see the shame in yourself. So what I do when I teach this week at React is I say to the clients, think of times when you feel not good enough. Think of times when you feel not lovable, less than. How would you draw a picture of yourself at that moment in time? And so they'll start giving me their answers, but usually they go along the lines, I wouldn't be able to look people in the eye. I'd be looking at the floor. Some go back to a childhood memory when they didn't feel good enough, and they would want to curl up in a fetal position under their bed or in a closet because they just felt terrible about themselves. Others, I then say, what color is your drawing done in? And you realize that about 95% of the time, the people say it's black and white. There's no color in their shame drawing of themselves. And that to me is significant because it's almost to their mind that shame takes the color out of life. And it makes it a very dull color where you live in a black and white, pleasureless world when you have shame. Another characteristic of people with shame, and I will sometimes ask this, is are you able to look yourself in the eye when you look in the mirror? And many people with shame are not able to look at themselves in the eye when they look in the mirror. Some don't even look in a mirror because they can't stand to do that. Others, when they look in the mirror, never look at themselves in the eye. They either look at themselves from the nose down or from the eyebrows up, because that is what shame does. You don't like yourself because you feel you don't have value, you don't feel good enough, so therefore you don't like yourself. Okay, so now I take clients to this. Every child at a subconscious level comes into the world asking certain questions. Number one, who am I? What is my personality? What am I good at? And then, am I lovable? Do I have any value? Do people want to be with me? Do people like me? What do I have to offer that would make people interested in me? So they are asking those questions at a subconscious level. And then it's not just do people love me, but do they desire me? Do they, when they look at me, not just love me out of obligation, but do their eyes light up and they get excited about spending time with me? So what all of those express, those subconscious questions, are deep longings and desires built into every human being. I want to be desirable. I want to have value. I want to be lovable. I want somebody to want a relationship with me. All of those questions are asked at a subconscious level. So then I say, how do we get the answer to those questions? So I use a metaphor. If a child wants to know who they are externally, what they look like, they look in a mirror. So I say, use that metaphor. If a child wants to know who they are on the inside, their personality, if they have value, if they're lovable, there are mirrors that reflect back to them the answers to those questions. And those mirrors begin with mom and dad. So what mom and dad say to you, how they treat you, their attitude towards you, mirror back to you whether you have value and whether you're lovable. If you take that to a healthy home, a child growing up with healthy parents, what reflection do they get when they look at mom and dad? They get the constant, consistent message, you have great value. You don't have to do anything. You have value inherent within you. You are lovable, and we are committed to unconditional love to you. So a child growing up in that environment, they have a positive self-image. They feel good about themselves. They don't have thousands of insecurities because they know who they are. They know their place, their value, all of that. When you come to complex trauma, the mirror says a negative message. In a healthy home, positive messages come from the mirror. Complex trauma, negative messages. So I want to go through a list of things that mom and dad can do or say to you that mirror back to you messages about who you are. So, and many of you, this is going to start stirring up memories for you, because many of these you will have experienced. Some of you have gone through, you shared your opinion with mom and dad, and they laughed at you. In other words, you got the message, you're stupid. And that was reinforced in a whole bunch of different ways. Some you got eye rolling when you shared stuff. Sometimes people would just start walking away from you because it was like, you're dumb, I don't want to listen to that. And you internalize that message. Next, belittling. Some of you heard you'll never amount to anything. Some heard you'll never do anything right. You can't do anything right. You're a failure. You'll never be more than just a failure. And those were expressed to you on a regular basis. Now, some of you say, well, mom and dad only said that when they were angry. They didn't say that when they were in a good mood. And what I say to clients is this: if you're really honest, what you're trying to say is that didn't impact me because I knew they were angry. But be honest with yourself. Did it impact you? Yes. Because sometimes when people are angry, you think they take away all their filters and they speak what they really believe. And so you believe what they say in anger. Another one, many of you grew up with them teasing you, calling you names. They might have had pet names that they thought were cute, but that hurt. So you might have been called chubby or pudgy. You might have been called four eyes, all of those different things. And they used it as a joke to tease you, but it just killed you inside. And it made you become very body conscious. All of those things you got, I'm not good enough. And then you might have got a mother or a father that no matter how well you did something, it never was quite good enough. They would find something wrong with it, something to criticize. If you came home with a fantastic report card, straight A's except for one B, they wouldn't congratulate you about the straight A's. They go, why did you get a B? And it was like the straight A's didn't mean anything to them. They focused on what you didn't do perfectly. And that sent a message to you. Some of your parents compared you. Why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you be like your cousin? And that sent a message that you're not good enough. Others, parents blamed you for their problems. We fight as a couple because you're a bad kid. I drink because you're a bad kid. And you were made to feel that it's my fault. My parents are struggling, or it's my fault they're getting a divorce. I must be really bad. And you internalize that. Some of you were not allowed to express certain emotions. You were told you're too sensitive, you cry too much, you're too sad, you're always moping around, you're too angry, nobody likes to be around you. And you were made to feel that because of you having those emotions, something's wrong with you. You're not good enough. And then sometimes parents made promises to you that they broke. And if they did that repeatedly, you began to feel, wonder if they're breaking the promise because they really don't want to be with me. And you internalize that in a negative way. Now, on the flip side of that is you get children who are spoiled or who have no rules. And people ask me, how could they ever have shame? They just got all kinds of gifts. They had everything given to them. Here's what I've been told by spoiled kids over the years. Number one, my parents tried to buy my love. Instead of giving me themselves, they gave me gifts so I would like them. That didn't feel good. And I wanted to connect with them, but I got a gift instead, and I felt something was wrong with me, why they had to buy me off with gifts. Second, why did nobody care enough about me to say no? If they really cared about me, they would have said no to some of the stuff. The fact they never said no makes me feel that I don't matter, that I'm not cared for. And that sends a negative message. We always talk about the four environments of complex trauma, so neglect, Parents who meet your physical needs but aren't there emotionally for you, that sends a message to you that something must be wrong with you. That's why they don't want to connect emotionally to you. Or you try to connect and you hit a wall and you conclude, what's wrong with me? Then you might have come from a family where it was all about image. So at home, everybody hit each other and yelled at each other and fought. As soon as you went out in public, be polite. Treat me with respect. Don't have a hair out of place. Look good. And you began to feel, I'm just a trophy on Dad's arm. I'm just here to make him look good. I'm not here because I matter for me. I'm here because it's all about him. And that sends a shame message to you. If you're not nurtured or your needs aren't met consistently, we talk about that all the time. Some of you grew up in a family where you weren't validated for what you did well. Some of you might have come up from a family where you were told, we're not going to tell you about all the good stuff you did because we don't want you to get a big head. So we're not going to say anything positive about you. But we all need validation. And if you don't get validation, you begin to go, what's wrong with me? Next one, abuse, any type of abuse. The child takes the message, what's wrong with me that they're hitting me? It's got to be my fault. Why are they saying those nasty things to me? I must not be good enough. So abuse sends one of the loudest mere messages that something is wrong with you. And then abandonment, in my mind, sends the greatest shame message. So if you think of the two people that gave you life, mom and dad, biological parents, if they don't want you and get rid of you, what does that say about you? If the two people who are to naturally have a built-in love for their offspring don't want you, that must mean you're a zero. And that nobody will want you if they get to know you. So abandonment sends the harshest, deepest, most painful shame message. Conditional love is another one. Some days you're showered with love, other days they withhold love, and you feel it's your fault. Shame-based parenting, that's when mom always is going, shame on you, shame on you, shame on you. She thinks it's going to motivate you to do better. But if that's all you hear, you begin to believe you're just a screw-up. And it begins to be your belief system. A subtle one, and I want to go into a couple subtle ones now. Your parents' value system affects how you see yourself, okay? So if mom is all about still looking like a 30-year-old when she's 50, you are getting a loud value message that says women only have value if they're a great sex object. And that can come through loud and clear. Secondly, if dad is obsessed with his car and it is his baby and you can't sit in it if you got the speck of dirt on you, then you go, that car matters more than me. His value system is a fancy car. Where do I fit in? And that sends a message. If you grew up in a family where there's a really good work ethic, but it goes a little bit too far, and it says you're only worth something if you can hold down a job all the time, and then you get sick and you can't work, and you go on disability, and you go, I'm a loser. I have no value now. So parents' value systems are very important in figuring out shame messages. Subtle ones. Do you realize I'm told that about 10% of children have bedwetting problems? After they've been toilet trained, they will still wet their bed at night. What I understand is when you get to addicts, about 20% of addicts had bedwetting problems even later than just a couple years. And so it was a source of great embarrassment, often the source of a lot of shame and ridicule within the house, and that sent a very painful message to the child. Another one is if you grow up in a poor family in a more affluent area and you go to school and all the kids have new clothes and you're wearing hand-me-downs. All the kids have the latest shoes and the latest cell phones and you don't even have a cell phone and you're wearing your brother's old shoes with holes in them. You start to feel less than all the time, not just in the family, but in culture in general. If you come from a different ethnic culture, so your family moved, let's say, from Syria as a refugee, or your parents came from the war when you were little and you didn't know English, you didn't know the culture, you didn't dress like Canadians, that was a very hard thing and it can send a shame, not good enough message. Final, really subtle one is this. We don't have this a lot anymore, but 50 years ago it was not uncommon for families to have 8 to 12 children. Some even had up to 15 children. So what happened to the youngest children is the oldest children parented them. And so it wasn't that mom and dad didn't want to neglect their children. They just had too many kids to give all the attention that those kids needed. And so a child can feel neglected. With that, if you grew up with a sibling who was sick, mom and dad give all of their attention to that sick child and you feel neglected. They're not intending to send a shame message, but you're perceiving that you're not good enough. So those are all subtle shame messages. Now let me add one more piece, okay? In a healthy home, parents make a distinction with a child. Number one is who they are. Number two is what the child does. So a child may do wrong things. A child may do kid things like spilling their milk. And the parent says, regardless of what you do, you are still valuable and we love you for who you are. We might not like what you do, but we love you. Okay? In a complex trauma family, what happens more frequently is you did something bad, therefore you are bad. So that distinction isn't made between what you do and who you are. And so now, if you grew up in that, as soon as you do something bad in your mind, even if it's spilling your milk, you beat yourself up and go, I'm a loser. And that comes out of that lack of distinction between what I do and who I am. Okay, if that's not bad enough, I'm going to keep going. So that was just home life. Oh, I should add one other piece to the home life. What can happen in some families is mom and dad aren't the problem, is you have a sibling who's older and stronger than you, and they abuse you, they say cruel things to you, and they say if you ever tell mom and dad, this is going to happen to you. They threaten you. That in itself can send shame messages because now you're in pain, you're getting all of this stuff bombarding you, and you got to keep it a secret. And it can do its damage. Okay, if you go outside of the family, let's go to our culture. And let's look at our culture as a mirror that reflects to young people today messages about themselves, or, to put it another way, they set a standard for what normal is. So what is the standard of Hollywood? You're really popular if you got a perfect body and a perfect face. So what does that say to 90% of our culture today, young girls coming up especially, when they watch Disney movies in Hollywood, they feel less than. They feel not good enough because Hollywood set a standard for what every girl should attain to. as being their normal. Also, if you look at Hollywood, who is it that gets the greatest following and makes the most money? Sports stars, music stars, actors and actresses. People with popularity and a great skill. Or people that are very wealthy. So what are we telling people is the normal? You got to be rich, pretty, and you got to be really, really good at either singing, sports, or acting. Otherwise, you're less than. And that reinforces messages that they might already have gotten in home. Now let's go to one more mirror. School. And school actually is two mirrors. Number one, school just as an institution, what does it say is the normal standard of a normal child? You have to be smart. So let's say you have a child that works their very hardest, and the best they can ever get is a B minus. What does our culture say to that child? You're not quite good enough. And so we can end up with a system that is very necessary and very helpful, but it can actually reinforce shame to certain people. And then if you go outside of just the curriculum and the school institution to the other students, what do you get as a standard from them? Who are the popular kids? The ones with a great body, the ones who are good in sports, the ones with a car already, the ones that can throw a party, the outgoing ones. And if you don't meet that standard, you're not quite good enough. And then you get the bullies. And that's the other mirror. The people who are stronger than other kids, who put them down on a regular basis. So what I want you to see from this is that your home is the most powerful mirror, but there are also other mirrors that will affect a child's self-perception and their sense of who they are and whether they're good enough. And sadly, we live in a culture where most of the messages the average child is getting is, I'm not good enough. And that is a tragic reality of what we live in today. Okay. I'm going to take you then, what does that do to a child? What emotions does that then create when they're made to feel not valuable, not lovable, not good enough? Well, you can imagine there's pain, lots of it. There's fear. Will anybody want me? Will anybody respect me? And so they have a lot of anxiety now as they make friends. A lot of insecurities are now there. Many with shame become depressed because they don't like themselves. Life sucks. They hate themselves. They are very hard on themselves. Some begin self-harming behaviors because they hate themselves so much. They find out there's a lot of anger in there. They're jealous of anybody that has more attention than them. They're envious of what everybody else has. They get very negative about themselves and everybody else. And they're very discontent. And for some, they get to a place where they feel hopeless. I am a total screw up. I don't see